welcome to part 2 of our complete destruction of Skinny Wop's video. If you haven't seen part 1, you should. So, where were we? Oh yes, Skinny was about to tell us
why the Palestinians have had quite a few hostilities towards Israel since Israel's inception.
And here's the list.
And all the things I listed to him were just in the beginning years of Israel. I'm talking about like the first 3 years of Israel's history this shit happened.
Well everybody, you know the drill. It's time to... Because here are the years, not even in the proposed time frame. And better yet, here are the targets. So please tell us all, Skinny, how can 2/3 of the 3 main reasons for Palestinian
hostilities towards Israel
not be directed against Palestinians at all? And for YouTube's joke of the year, Skinny Wop, you have instigated for weeks exposing yourself as an idiot?
Jesus Christ, man, you failed.
But for the sake of pawnage, let's break it down. First,
the King David hotel bombing,
which now Skinny thinks was the Jewish response to the partition plan.
The Jewish response was less violent? Yeah, hardly. Tell that to the victims of the King David hotel bombing.
No, Skinny, I will not tell them because the partition plan is 1 year ahead of the bombing. So please leave us all out of your
damn temporal Cold War.
But for the sake of real history, this attack was perpetrated by the 2 separatist groups Etzel and Lehi, which soon after will be fighting the Haganah, but back then were still fighting the British. So they went to the hotel, which back then
housed the British Army headquarters and the Palestine government offices,
and planted bombs under the southern wing, which is the reason why that's the only part of the hotel that got demolished. See?
He said that the victims of that terrorist attack should have heeded the warning from the terrorists.
No, I wrote someone, not the victims, and I wrote bomb threat calls, not warnings, because after planting the bombs, they made 3 bomb threat calls. 1 to the hotel, telling them to evacuate, 1 to the French consulate nearby, telling them to open their windows so they won't shatter, and 1 to the Palestine Post. Now, the Post informed the police, the French opened their windows, and everybody in the hotel was evacuated, except for the British military and government offices, probably because of a really stubborn British officer.
Marching up and down the square! Not good enough for you, eh?
And the results?
The tragic scene is like a serious incident during the Blitz.
But forget the bloody Blitz. Skinny thinks that this terror attack was so horrible that...
Until the Pan Am bombing over Scotland, it was the worst in history.
Come on, Skinny. Being so anti-racist all of a sudden, I would expect you to at least mention the 2,000 freedmen and Republicans killed by the KKK in the 1868 presidential election week, putting the King David attack to shame and doing so almost a century before, which is, by the way,
in history.
And yes, the Pan Am bombing of '88 with its 270 dead was a horrible crime. But with 299 French and American dead, I would say that the 83 military Beirut barracks bombing by Hezbollah was a little bit worse. Unless, of course, you don't count targeting military facilities, in which case the King David Hotel doesn't count either. Next.
The Lavon affair.
Now, since anti-Zionists won't do it, I will do it for them. Some context. Back in the 50s, Western governments weren't only supplying Arabs with weapons, they also planned on leaving the Suez and Tiran Straits, which are vital for Israel's existence. So, in an amazingly stupid and foolhardy operation, a group of young Egyptian Jews planted incendiary bombs in Egyptian, American, and British institutions, hoping that that will convince Western governments that the Egyptian regime is unstable and that way they will stay.
He actually said that the Israelis themselves exposed the Lavon affair.
Skinny, please, some logic. Why the hell do you think you're calling it the Lavon affair? And how the hell do you think you know that?
The highest ranking officials in Israel were involved in it, all the way up to Ben Gurion.
What, you think Egyptians exposed it? Do you think they even cared? Now, Skinny says that
the Lavon affair was exposed after one of the bombs prematurely exploded and the guy got caught.
No, Skinny. An alleged spy ring was exposed when one of the bombs went off in one of the spy's pants, wounding him, which just comes to show how deadly these bombs were. Now, back then, public opinion weren't too impressed by the confessions by torture. They were also kind of used to Egyptian alleged spy rings and the anti-Semitic Soviet-style show trial allegations. In fact, the first reports which actually said that they were communists were mentioned in relation to another spy ring trial, this time of the Muslim Brotherhood. Interestingly, one of the many members of the Muslim Brotherhood that were arrested back then was one very young Yasser Arafat, who will in later years lead the secular PLO. So in any case, the story dies off until 5 years later, when Israeli newspaper uncovered that not only the operation was for real, but the guys who gave the order behind the government's back unjustly incriminated Mr. Lavon. Hence the name the Lavon affair, which is why I said
that the Israelis themselves exposed the Lavon affair.
Because in all probabilities, this trial would have been added to a long list of forgotten Egyptian show trials, leaving your type of anti-Zionist to pick, twist, and spin some other story out of history. You know, something like
Deir Yassin. For those of you who don't know about the history of Deir Yassin,
oh no, not again.
The Arab armies basically came in and they told this village, you guys gotta get out, because we're gonna move in on Israel. As soon as we're done, you guys can come back in.
And this would explain the mysterious reports of a flying DeLorean spotted at the scene.
What the hell is going on here?
After all, Arab armies will invade only 1 month later. Funny enough, this is one of the reasons Palestinians exaggerated the reports on the massacre.
I asked Dr. Khalidi how we should cover the story. He said, we must make the most of this. So he wrote a press release stating that at Deir Yassin, children were murdered, pregnant women were raped, all sorts of atrocities.
We said there was no rape. He said we have to say this so the Arab armies will come to liberate Palestine from the Jews.
And now please explain, why did you say this happened?
After the first Arab-Israeli war,
could it be that you wanted to vilify Israel, not to mention this happened in the height of war after similar Arab atrocities and during the fierce battles over the road to Jerusalem, which the Arabs besieged, starving the Jewish quarter there? But I forgive Skinny for everything, because next he's going to make my point for me. This time regarding Israel
giving back the Sinai.
Now, Skinny thinks that
there's a strange history with Israel, Egypt, and the Sinai.
So strange, in fact, that Skinny thinks that in the
1973 Yom Kippur War.
Wait for it.
The Arab armies didn't necessarily win all the battles, but they won in the long run.
Oh, please tell us, Skinny, how can a surprise attack with these odds that ended this way?
4,000 men of the Jordanian 40th Brigade fought alongside an Iraqi armoured division attacking the southern flank. Both suffered heavily at the hands of the Israelis. They virtually wiped out the Syrian Navy. They crossed the ceasefire line into Syria on the 11th. 2 days later, they were 15 miles beyond the ceasefire line, only 25 miles from Damascus itself. It was not only the Egyptian armour that suffered. They were rampaging deep behind the Egyptian lines. A whole army was now dependent on Israeli goodwill in order to survive.
How can this be considered?
The Arab armies won in the long run.
In fact, the defeat was so astounding that Palestinians understood that they won't get Palestine back through military Arab force, which is why in 1974 they came up with the phased plan, stating that Palestinians should, and I kind of quote, strengthen ties to socialists and forces of liberation and progress throughout the world, employ all means to liberate Palestinian territory, to establish there a national authority to be used as a base of operations in continuing struggle against Israel.
The Korean A affair is a perfect example for the collaboration between the Palestinian Authority from the one hand and international terrorist entities from the other hand, such as Iran, and of course Hezbollah.
And to struggle against any proposal of recognition, peace, secure frontiers, or the deprival of Palestinian right of return. Which I would say is exactly what we see today, point to fucking point. And believe you me, if Palestinians were anything close to a real peace partner, they would already gotten their own state. Because just like you said, when Israel finds a real partner, they gladly get rid of occupied land. Look!
Israel finally had a partner that they could reach some mutual agreements with, Sadat. So they ended up moving out their troops and trading the land back for a peace deal.
Thanks, Skinny. So, like always, my beloved YouTube gang, peace, love, harmony. Mwah, have a good one, people. I love you all. Bye-bye.
I'm just saying what happened in history, so derp.